All right. Sorry we're late. We were in the green room, and our tamers just got us a little late, but we're here. We'll do a quick round of introductions, and we'll jump into our topic, and we'll start.
Sure. Eric Mill, GSA, Executive Director for Cloud Strategy. Spent a lot of time focusing on FedRAMP in particular and other aspects of cloud security.
Well, you told me a lot more out there about yourself.
Come on. If you're looking for a little bit of background, okay. I cut my teeth as a software engineer for a decade or so. Gradually got more into policy and product. So I've been in the private sector. This is my second time around in the federal government. Spent a little bit of time on the Hill and in OMB working on policy stuff. And right now I'm focused very much on sort of modernizing GSA's approach to cloud security, especially with FedRAMP.
Right on.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Trull. I am the corporate CISO at Qualys, so responsible for product and corporate security. And definitely want to give a shout out. We did sign up for CISA's Secure by Design pledge. We're big fans of that initiative, and we think we're an important part of the supply chain, so we take our security extremely seriously. Been FedRAMP moderate for quite a long time, and hopefully, fingers crossed, within this year we'll be FedRAMP high. So very relevant, obviously, for this audience. Spent 8 years in the Navy as a Navy information warfare officer. Was the CISO for the state of Colorado for quite a while, so not quite the same level of politics involved, but had our share of working with the governor and the legislature to get funding and get initiatives rolled out to all state agencies. Then decided to make my move to the private sector. So spent 5 years running Microsoft's what is known as the detection and response team. So the incident response team that unfortunately would deploy to many environments out here in the DC area after a Patch Tuesday or whatever culminated in some type of incident. So spent a lot of time traveling the world, responding to incidents, which I think is where the gray hair came from. And then, post that, I really came back to Qualys because I wanted to, I always think like, why don't we as a society, as a group, as a community, focus as much energy on risk reduction as we do on incidents, right? And again, that was my experience at Microsoft. Like when an incident happens, right, it's all hands on deck. I mean, we send teams in, we work, 20 hours a day until stuff is resolved over the weekends. But like, why don't we put that energy when it's like doing the hygiene, right? Doing the risk reduction. And so I came back to hopefully help try to fix that, as an industry. But obviously, most important, make sure that our product is never an avenue of attack to someone else.
One of you two said something, before I introduce myself, one of you two said something, this is a question for the audience. It was roughly 2000 to 2010 plus, who was the largest purchaser of 0 days within our government? One of these guys gave the answer, they don't know it yet. One of them might know the answer. Who was the largest purchaser of 0 days? Does anyone know? They might be the largest proxy creator, but no. It was the Navy. It was the Navy. U.S. Navy. Did you know that? Richard Seiersen, Chief Risk Technology Officer. My background, serial recovering CISO, CISO GE, Twilio, Lending Club. Some of you might know me. I wrote a couple books. My first book is actually the main curriculum for the Department of Defense CISO program out of Carnegie Mellon. It's a book called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. It's got a pea green cover. It's really good for pressing flowers. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm going to just do a couple slides to kind of set us up for what's hopefully going to be a real controversial talk. I also gave them permission to, whatever question I ask, they can answer whatever question they hoped I asked. All right?
I work for the government. We're really good at that.
Okay. That's where I learned it, right? Politics. Okay. So here's a question for you. If you want to write this down or think about it, you can. What's the chance? What's the chance? If you had to assign a number to one of these, a number between 0 and 100, not a range, but an only number, what's the chance? What would you give for unlikely? What would you give for probable? What would you give for likely? What would you give for highly likely? I've done this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. But here's how NATO officers responded to this, like this. NATO, this is how they think about that. That's pretty bad, meaning that when you start thinking about risk and you start thinking about probabilities and you then turn that into words or colors, you get this. People are thinking different thoughts. I've done this with hundreds and hundreds of Fortune 1000 plus CISOs, and here's a sample from that data set. It's even worse. Jeez. It's really bad. So why am I telling you this? Because I'm going to tell you a story about the Bay of Pigs. So JFK had just became president. He had inherited a strategy for taking back Cuba using expats, using Cubans who are likely in Florida. So he took that strategy, marched over to his cabinet and said, hey, what's the probability of this being successful? I want you to analyze it, give you a little bit of time, come back to me. So they went off and they went analyze, did their thing. He came back to them, he said, so what do you think? What's the probability of success? They said, likely. And he went off and we got Bay of Pigs. It failed, of course. It was a blemish upon our history and the world. He then went back to the cabinet and said, well, what's up? You said it was like likely successful. They said, yeah, we didn't tell you. Likely meant 30%. True story. So we're going to talk about risk a little bit, right? We'll talk about compliance and security, but the overarching thing is risk. It is so easy to do risk wrong. It's so important to do it right. And that leads me to my first question. We'll lead with Eric. So when we think about risk management, we often get to what about security versus compliance? Does compliance make us avoid focusing on the risk that matters and have us focus on the things that don't matter?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those eternal kind of tensions, right? And of course, there really is supposed to be no difference between the two in theory, right? Like there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is, right? One of my favorite phrases. You know, the many regulated industries, right, the government included, really, you know, I think have to work through this so that they're not accidentally putting the two in tension with each other, right? And so that we can 90% of the time or more just try to be thinking of them as exactly the same thing. But one of the things that I know I've seen in my own background as an authorizing official before in the government, and just in terms of how you think about things broadly with products, you want to be able to make sure you're implementing these things as a ceiling and as a floor and not as a ceiling, right? So I think we all try to think about, for those of us in the room who are like security professionals, which I imagine is a lot of people in the room, you know that everything that has been asked of you to do, that has been come to be known as such a best practice that it should show up somewhere in your corporate rule book, in your regulator's rule book, and whoever's rule book is being put at you. Anything that's sort of risen to that level, that's giving you some kind of baseline to approach. If you're a security professional, you know that is a subset. People have not thought of everything and that you need to defend against, and certainly the kind of things that would get such consensus and be so well known already to end up in a rule book, those are not going to be describe all the threats that you are going to face in the actual real world, where you have creative people who are paid to attack you and think about these things on a daily and monthly basis. So it's really important when we think about the bureaucratic structures that we're in charge of, that we're responsible for creating, that we are always finding a way to firmly position the world of compliance as a floor and not as just what it means to be secure in the first place. And that we always have our brain awake to the edge cases, right? To whatever small percentage of things that, where for whatever reason, these things do start to feel in tension with each other. As I'm sure you know, having written a book on measuring cybersecurity, you can have something that only happens.
I've written 2 books.
2 books, I'm sorry.
Don't you forget it.
Yeah, if something only occurs 1% of the time, but you're dealing with thousands and thousands of things, it's going to happen a fair amount.
I've given them permission and encouragement to be controversial. Go, get them, Tiger.
Oh, controversial. Yeah, so, I think security versus compliance, I mean, my career has definitely shaped my views on it. And I guess maybe this is more the controversial side. I think when I was at the state of Colorado, I think we initially started down a path when I was first there that was very compliance driven, right? We would say, hey, 18 agencies, once a year you have to do this massive assessment, churn out, 800 pages of docs that they would go hire a consultant to do. They wouldn't submit it on time, so I'd have to go yell at the governor and say, please go talk to your executive director. It's in the law that they have to submit this. And then we'd get breached, right, the next month. And then something else would happen the next month. And then they're like, hey, did you read that document? And I'm like, I can't, that's 800 pages times 18. I'm trying to run the security ops center. And I think, it was that moment that kind of made me pause and just say, like, are we doing this the right way? Definitely in that environment, and is this sustainable for the state? And we also did FedRAMP for our cloud solutions, so there were a lot of, IRS requirements for revenue collection. I mean, there was a lot, and again, but we kept getting breached, right? We kept having issues. And so, I would say, the two in practice, like you said, oftentimes don't intertwine, right? And then I would say my other issue with compliance is can we please figure out a way to make compliance move at the speed that technology moves, right? Because again, by the time I got that report, the environment was out of date. Things had changed. The dynamics, new operating systems had been, deployed, new cloud solutions. So that paper was kind of irrelevant at that point. And similarly for other, compliance regimes, whether it's SOC 2, ISO certification, it's just, I think we have to figure out a way if we can better automate a lot of our compliance work. And just to give you the scope of it, it's not just like FedRAMP or federal government. We receive 2,700 audits from our customers, 10,000 customers, 2,700 audits a year against our technology, right? And so now I'm doing one for the financial services, one for the federal government, state ramp for the state government, and it's like, we do a lot, and my question is like, why can't we all use the same, right? Like, why is it different? If it is such a common standard, why can't we agree? And then the more difficult problem, which I think you'll get into at some point, is what I just went through and provided, what does that really mean for you from a risk perspective? Honestly, when a lot of times when we're doing that, we never have a risk conversation, with people. They'll be like, hey, these CVEs were supposed to be patched within this SLA, and maybe it didn't happen. Yeah, but what was the risk of those CVEs? No one during that process ever asked me, hey, like, is it exploitable? Where is it in the product? Is that library, even if it's open source, actually called as a function where it exposes risk? Never, honestly, in usually those compliance type initiatives.
It just shows up on the scan report.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to be asking a FedRAMP question for you, and then you can go back at him on this. But just to summarize here, so we have artificially intelligent and sentient bad guys on one side. On the other side of the CISO, we have successful businesses that are, if you're a successful business, you're exposing more value to more people through more channels at higher velocities. And we're the CISO in the middle. And now I get FedRAMP. And here's my question. If I am able to demonstrate that I have an asset that's actually not exposed and has both inline and host space compensating controls, shouldn't I be alleviated of having to go fix that? And why do I care? If I work for a very large company, if I have to go to fix things that are actually not exploitable, that don't put the public at risk, right? I shouldn't have to spend money on fixing that. I ran security operations across the United States for Kaiser Permanente. I don't know if you guys know Kaiser, largest health maintenance organization in the US. And I actually went toe-to-toe with PCI on this. And we were able to get alleviation on things that just didn't matter. Are you going to do that with FedRAMP?
I've been on the receiving end in prior jobs of scan reports like the kind that he talked about, right? Where you just know that some of the stuff is just essentially not applicable, right? But like there's something that's specific about your environment that's just not incorporated into whatever the auditing environment is that's coming at you on something, right? And I think a thing that we're definitely at GSA and at FedRAMP in particular really trying to make sure we put that understanding into practice, that like our job here, especially some of the language you see from us both publicly and that we talk a lot about internally is security first, right? It's security outcomes are what's important, and it's why people make any security certification process in the first place who care about the outcome. there's multiple things that go into why you make a certification program, but security is in the top. It is a huge part of it. So, absolutely like aligned with everything that we're talking about here as a concept. Like one of the things that we're trying to do right now to help make that a little bit easier to put into practice. There's a couple things I'll mention. One is, really trying to take some of these things that kind of get adjudicated in a bit of a black box, and you're like, does this different way of doing things, will this pass muster or not? Like, we're trying to create something that is sort of not a very sophisticated technology project, but essentially just something we're starting to put out more like, here's examples of how things have gone through the process before that have worked. Trying to showcase a variety of ways that that have successfully made it through this process. There's a lot of, I think there's understandable, folks have experienced the process of just sort of not knowing like how to even predict whether something is going to cause friction or not in the process, and we'd like to make that more predictable. Another aspect then, I think that goes to something you talked about, like having compliance move at the speed of delivery. That is, we have been talking a lot about security as speed as a security property, and so one of the things that we're working to get out information on very soon that we have talked about doing is, for folks who are familiar with FedRAMP, you may be familiar, there's a bit of a change control board style process to reviewing significant changes. And that is something where we're putting some of the early finishing touches on a pilot that we'll be asking for participants to pilot an approach that has this move to a non-blocking process, right? Where we are putting more emphasis on some of the information sharing and work that should be predictable and go into the process ahead of time so that we can be comfortable with a process that doesn't need to block on approval of each individual change. Because, I don't know about you, but I have certainly, in my life seen things like, people takes them 18 months to bring a WAF online because of an approval process of something like that or another, where like what was really the bigger security problem was like not having the thing deployed in the first place, right? And so that's something where we want to make sure we're incentivizing and the U.S. government is getting the benefit of as many security features as possible by changing how information moves through the process. So these are things that are on our mind to try to speak to, I think, some of the things that you're raising.
I think he said yes-ish or no-ish.
We'll definitely sign up for the pilot.
Yeah, the art of answering questions like that is to leave exactly that question in the mind of the asker.
I like it. You're well trained. So, FedRAMP. Good, bad, ugly, challenging? What's going on?
Listen, we're supportive of FedRAMP, that it helps our customers get comfortable that we do the right thing for security. And like we're going to do the right thing for security no matter what, whether it's FedRAMP or not. And honestly, I even think, just to put in perspective, like with the new, if you're a CISO of a publicly traded company, I know everyone's like, who carries the risk? Well, guess what? The SEC now says I carry the risk, right? So whether I do FedRAMP or not, like if something happens to my product that happens to you, like I'm on the hook, right? And forget, sure, some hearing, go testify, the bigger concern is I go to jail, right? For me personally, right? So the stakes are very high. I think FedRAMP helps, the federal community get comfortable, but we would do it anyway, right? We've always devoted security. No, I do agree, like my biggest problem with FedRAMP is the speed at which we can deliver innovation to our customers. And if one thing could be fixed, that is the thing, right? Because again, yeah, everyone's scared of AI, but listen, AI does a lot of great things for you, right? It makes your teams more efficient. It stops you from calling the help desk because now a chatbot can answer questions for you, right? But for us to enable AI, in the FedRAMP platform, that's a 6-month process, maybe, right? Maybe more, and so now that's the struggle. It's like I'm ready. I can show you that we've deployed it, developed it securely, and just going through that process though is painful. Because again, like our end goal is to deliver fast, right? Deliver often, and trying to marry up those two worlds right now is just it's hard, right? But I think a lot of the initiatives around like OSCAL and doing more machine readable, hopefully I think the idea is like, hey, we'll subscribe to that, and then the process moves faster. I think is what ideally I'm hoping for.
So slowness, I think it was CISA, was in the preface of their report in 2023 looking at 2022, the majority of exploitability was actually in older CVEs that are persisted longer. Meaning as defenders and vendors, we've gotten really good at remediating 0 days. Go figure, that's like an epiphany of the obvious. Actually, Marsh McClellan said that in terms of claims that are getting paid, where money's actually, money's trading hands, is actually also with those older CVEs. So as I think about things that slow us down from being able to innovate, it's a double-edged sword, right? If we can't make change quickly, we are going to be exposing things longer to the bad guys. So that's a concern that I have. So let's talk about AI a little bit more, all right? With that, what are you seeing from I'll point, you're looking at him, you want me to ask him first? No. From a FedRAMP perspective, do you see that as something that you're going to be addressing more squarely?
I mean, right now, where our AI efforts are focused are on a very public effort, which has been one of the taskings that the president had in the executive order on artificial intelligence, was for FedRAMP to prioritize it as part of a framework on emerging technology broadly. And that's something we've really embraced. In particular, this is really the first time that FedRAMP will be formally prioritizing anything other on a substantive basis, right? On an attempt to align strategically what its resources are with where the government holistically needs to be prioritizing. That is new for the program, and so that as a result, it's been a lot of work that we have enjoyed doing, and we put out a draft of this framework early in the year, asked for public comment. We have the final coming out pretty soon. That I know has been responsive to a lot of the good comments that folks have made. We're really focused in that on making sure that our focus is on how FedRAMP prioritizes these things and to make sure that we're focused on what is actually emerging. So a lot of the effort we're putting in is less about like what's the best kind of AI or like what is the most secure form of it, and it is more about making sure that like when we are prioritizing like what is actually generative AI that did not exist in a meaningful way 5 years ago, and that we're also prioritizing. We're using our own finite resources on a finite number of things, so there doesn't it's not the entire program, right? So figuring that out has been an interesting challenge, and I really appreciate. We got a lot of comments on it, I'm sure from some people in this room, which we really appreciated.
That's great. We have a couple minutes left. I want to allow you to make any closing comments that you might have about risk in general, particularly the division between security and compliance and risk management and FedRAMP.
I'll go?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, listen, I would say, my parting thoughts are, I am hopeful for a world where, we will start to focus more on risk, right? Risk quantification. I mean, honestly, if you look at the language, even in a lot of the new federal requirements, right, it is moving to more of a risk-based model, and again, I think that goes back to probably all of the little kind of problems we've all experienced with different compliance regimes. None of them are perfect, but at the end of the day, I think we just have to say, what is the risk to my business of whatever, this solution, and really get better at quantifying it. I think I put this, honestly, it's the most like clicked on thing I've ever said on LinkedIn, which was, probably my team approaches me 50 times a day, and the word is always, this is critical. This is critical. This vendor didn't do this, it's critical. I'm like, how can we have 80 critical things today? Like how is it possible? And so then I started asking, what does that mean? What does critical mean to you? Like, to me, that means stop everything, I'm quitting my day and we're focusing on this thing, and you start digging in there like, well, it's sort of important, and then, yeah, maybe critical's the wrong word, and I'm like, it's a terrible word. It's a terrible word because it has no meaning to me that I can act on, and so, I'm just really hoping that we can start driving a lot more of that risk quantification, into our vocabulary, how we make decisions, is really where I think compliance needs to head.
For the purpose of prioritizing action.
Action, specifically, where do I spend my money? And then on the receiving end, I mean, for agencies that are saying, okay, how do I, because I mean that's FedRAMP, right? What is the risk of me using this product? I mean, it goes to open source, it goes to SBOM, it goes to, like, all of those things are the same. Like, what is the risk of Log4j? And what is the risk in this specific application, right? Like, if you can't answer that, then, I mean, we're all just, you know, kind of pushing paper and making noise, in my opinion, unless we can really get to that risk quantification.
That was a beautiful closure. Thank you,
Yeah.
Eric and Jonathan. We just finished on time.